Have you ever stared at an ancient story and felt the weight of a mystery that refuses to fade? The tale of Cain, marked, cursed, yet somehow father to a legacy, raises a burning question that the Bible only hints at. If Adam and Eve were the first humans, who was Cain's wife? This isn't just a theological riddle. It's a window into the deepest questions of our origin, our morality, and the human condition. Before we uncover this forgotten trail of ancient lives, make sure you subscribe now and activate notifications. This isn't just content. It's a journey through time and spirit. And trust me, by the end of this video, you'll never look at Genesis the same way again. In the quiet aftermath of Eden, as the dust settled on mankind's first rebellion, a new darkness emerged. Not just the banishment from paradise, but the shadow that falls over the human soul. Cain, the firstborn of humanity, stands at the edge of this darkness, wrestling with his own identity. He's not merely a figure of biblical history, he is the archetype of jealousy, of pride wounded, of love turned bitter. The soil he tills carries more than crops. It bears the echoes of a brother's blood. And yet, from this tragedy, something impossible is said to have emerged. A wife, a child, a city. But how? We often think of Genesis as a story told in absolutes, light and dark, good and evil. But what if the truth lies in the margins, in the silence between the verses? Cain's wife is never named in the canonical texts. She appears without introduction, like a ghost from the wilderness. And that raises the question every reader eventually stumbles upon. Where did she come from? It's a question that pierces the logical structure of the biblical lineage and demands answers that the text refuses to give outright. This is not a plot hole. It's an invitation to look deeper, beyond the black and white of the printed page. When Cain cries out to God, fearing that someone might kill him for his crime, we catch the first glimpse that Eden was not as empty as we imagined, that others, unmentioned, unnamed, already walked the earth. And this isn't just speculation. It's rooted in the very fear Cain expresses, in the divine response that places a mark upon him, not to shame, but to protect. What are we missing? Could there have been other children, brothers, sisters, unrecorded by name, yet vital to the tapestry of early humanity? And if so, what does that say about how we read sacred texts? These aren't just old stories. They're encoded messages, wrapped in metaphor and mystery, waiting for the brave and curious to unearth them. And perhaps, the silence about Cain's wife is louder than any verse ever spoken. Many scholars have ventured to fill this silence. Some suggest Cain's wife was his sister, born from Eve but never named, as ancient customs didn't prioritize the documentation of women. Others go further, proposing entire populations, created apart from Adam, existed, roaming lands beyond Eden, untouched by the narrative spotlight. And then, there are the apocryphal texts, the forbidden books, that speak the names Scripture forgot, Awan, Asura, whispered legends, or truths exiled from canon. This is the moment we start to pull back the curtain. This is where theology meets anthropology, and myth collides with history. If you've ever felt that the official version doesn't tell the whole story, you're not alone. Cain's tale is not just about murder. It's about exile, survival, and the wild, impossible persistence of legacy. And maybe, just maybe, it's about a love story born in the ashes of sin. So don't blink. What's coming next will change the way you see the Bible, forever. There's something primal about the fear that Cain voices when he cries out to God, "Whoever finds me will kill me." It's not just guilt, it's dread of the unknown, of others out there, others capable of vengeance. But who were these others? If humanity had only just begun with Adam and Eve, Cain's fear shouldn't have made sense. Unless, of course, the world was already pulsing with life outside the Edenic spotlight. Unless the story, as told, was only a sliver of a much larger narrative that the Bible only hints at. This moment, Cain's fear and God's response, shatters the illusion of isolation. The mark God places on Cain is not a scar of punishment. It's a seal of survival. It suggests a world beyond the page, people who could see him, judge him, end him. It forces us to rethink the garden as less of a starting point and more of a center point, one node in a wider human web. Maybe Eden was never the entire map. Maybe it was only home base. And what kind of world receives a man like Cain? a man who spilled his brother's blood, carrying a divine curse, now walking into lands unnamed, meeting people unmentioned. If there were others, how were they made? Some propose that God created more than one lineage, parallel humans beyond Adam's line, whose stories were simply not included in Scripture's focus on the chosen seed. Others suggest these were descendants of Adam and Eve themselves, brothers, sisters, cousins, born and dispersed, like seeds carried by the wind. One theory, often whispered but seldom preached, is that Cain married his own sister. It sounds scandalous by modern standards, but in the ancient world of Genesis, survival trumped taboo. When you are the first family on earth, lineage cannot afford to be picky. There are no strangers to marry. Only blood. Only kin. And for the early builders of human history, that was enough. The rules we live by had not yet been written. Even the apocryphal texts, exiled from canon but rich with detail, support this version. The Book of Jubilees names her Awan, a daughter of Eve, a sister to Cain. Her name means vice or strength, depending on the translation, and either way it speaks of the burden she bore, being joined to a cursed man, forging life from trauma, city from wilderness. In Awan, we see not just a wife, but a witness to a man's descent and his desperate hope for redemption. Their union produces Enosh, and with him, a spark of continuity. Cain, the murderer, becomes Cain, the builder. He erects a city and names it after his son. It's a powerful act of defiance against his fate, against his curse. Where he once shed blood, now he shapes stone. It's easy to dismiss Cain as the villain of Genesis, but what if he was something more? What if he was the first to truly live the consequences of his choices and still try to build something that would last? This is where theology becomes human. This is where Scripture breathes. It's not about perfection. It's about persistence, about flawed, broken people forging forward. Cain's story is a mirror, not a caution sign. And when you understand the depth of his journey, the weight of building a future with a woman who knew his sins and still bore his child, you begin to realize this story is less about judgment and more about mercy in motion. We often overlook the women of Genesis, not because they lacked importance, but because they lacked mention. Yet between each patriarch's name is the silence of the mothers, the wives, the daughters who made life possible. Awan is one such figure. Though the Bible does not name her, her impact is undeniable. Without her, there is no city, no legacy, no continuation. She is the shadow behind the mark, the breath behind the curse. Imagine her reality. To marry the man marked by God, a fugitive cursed from the land. To raise a child in exile surrounded by suspicion and fear. There is no romance here, only raw endurance. And yet she does it, not for love of Cain perhaps, but for the hope of something better. To prove that a new beginning can rise from even the worst of endings. She stands as an icon of strength, not celebrated in Scripture, but burned into its bones. The Book of Jubilees, controversial as it may be, restores Awan to her place in the lineage. It even suggests that she and Cain were twins, a detail that merges the poetic with the disturbing. But in ancient narrative, this twinning wasn't scandal. It was symbolism. It showed the tightness of the human circle, the inevitability of union, the closeness of destiny. Awan was not an outsider. She was of Cain, and with him, and part of the burden he bore. And what does it mean that Cain named a city after his son? It means he believed in legacy. It means that even in exile he imagined a future. Naming is an act of power. Naming is an act of hope. When Cain names Enosh and Enosh becomes the seed of a city, it's the first time humanity moves beyond wandering. It's the first time someone dares to plant not just crops, but roots. That act alone reshapes human destiny. We talk of Abel as the righteous one, but it was Cain who built the first city. It was Cain who organized, who established, who created stability out of wilderness. His hands, stained with blood, were also capable of blueprints and foundations. And Awan, silent though she remains, was right there beside him, raising the child, forging the home, standing amid the dust and stone. Their story is not one of love, but of survival. Not one of romance, but of reckoning. And in that survival, in that reckoning, is a kind of sacredness that transcends the neat categories of good and evil. Cain and Awan are not heroes. They are not saints. They are the first flawed founders of our human world, and maybe that makes them more real than anyone else in Genesis. So why does Scripture stay so silent about her? Perhaps because silence is its own kind of reverence. Or maybe because her story was never meant to be told in words, but in the echo of every city built, every child born, every cursed beginning turned toward grace. As we dig deeper into this origin myth, we begin to see how time itself bends in Genesis. The years stretch impossibly long. Adam lives for over 900 years. His children multiply not in twos and threes, but in dozens, perhaps hundreds. And with that multiplication comes a natural consequence. Overlapping generations, family trees that loop in on themselves, intertwining like vines. Cain's wife, then, becomes less of a mystery and more of an inevitability. In a world so young, so raw, who else could there be? Set, the third son of Adam and Eve, born after Abel's death, becomes the anchor for a new line. But even Set's descendants, according to apocryphal texts, married within the same bloodline. Asura, his wife, was his sister, or as some say, the widow of Abel. The lines blur again. Sin and sanctity walk hand in hand. There was no moral panic about this. There were no alternatives. These were the laws of necessity, not culture. When you're the first, you don't have the privilege of distance. You survive with who is near. And that's what many modern readers miss. They try to interpret Genesis with 21st century ethics, forgetting that this was a world still forming. A world where survival was the first commandment. Multiply, fill the earth. That wasn't a suggestion. It was a divine imperative. The intimacy of bloodlines was the only path forward. And in that, there is a strange kind of holiness, an understanding that creation, in its earliest stages, was always going to be messy. But it wasn't just physical survival. These unions carried forward spiritual legacy. From the line of Set came Enos, then Enoch, then Noah. These names are not random. They're spiritual landmarks. They're men who invoked the name of God, who walked with him, who obeyed when no one else did. That divine thread, fragile as it was, survived through imperfect unions, through whispered names like Awan, through lives lived in shadows, outside the canon, but never outside of God's reach. This, then, is the untold beauty of Cain and his kind, that even from judgment, purpose was born, that even from exile, cities could rise. There is no perfection in these pages, only persistence, only people pushing forward through curse and consequence, still daring to believe that something good could be made from their story. That's not just ancient myth, that's the human experience. Every generation since has carried the same burden, to build with broken hands, to love with scarred hearts, to plant hope in cursed soil. Cain's mark didn't end his life. It began it. It turned him from a wanderer into a witness. And the woman who stood beside him, silent, forgotten, but powerful, was just as crucial. Together, they proved that even in the aftermath of failure, new beginnings are possible. And perhaps that's the message beneath the message, that our worst moment does not have to be our final definition. That legacy can rise from loss, that even the one marked by God's wrath can become the father of a city. And maybe, just maybe, the unnamed ones, the Awans, the Asuras, are the real architects of salvation's first steps. We are drawn to the bright names, Abel the righteous, Noah the obedient, Abraham the chosen. But what of the ones buried in footnotes? What of the women whose names were lost but whose wombs bore the future? These women, silent in the scroll, are thundering in consequence. Without them, there is no legacy. Without them, the chosen line dies in Eden. Think of Asura. According to the Book of Jubilees, she married Set, and from their union came the line of promise. Her name, linked to the color of lapis lazuli, to the heavens themselves, echoes purity and divine intention. She was not a consolation prize. She was a continuation. The divine didn't just restart the human race with Set. He honored the one who bore his line. In a world where stories are often about the men, Asura's presence is proof that redemption has always been a shared task. And let's not forget the resilience required of these early women. They lived in a wild, unformed earth. They bore children without hospitals, without midwives, without certainty. They made homes in the dust. They buried sons lost to violence. They built nations from pain. These were not ornamental figures. They were the foundation. The Bible's silence about them is not a dismissal. It's a challenge. A challenge to the reader to look closer, to listen harder, to read between the lines, to not be content with surface truths, but to dig for the deeper meaning. Scripture leaves clues, and the wise do not ignore the trail just because it grows faint. These women are not fiction. They are flame. And what do we take from them today? That even when history forgets your name, your impact can echo through generations. That faithfulness in silence is still faithfulness. That obscurity is not failure. Awan and Asura may not be on stained glass windows, but their blood runs in every chapter that follows. Their strength is in every lineage, their courage in every covenant. This is a call to reclaim their story, to lift the veil on the forgotten, to recognize that the most powerful forces in Scripture were often the quietest, that behind every patriarch is a mother, behind every covenant, a womb, behind every name we remember, a woman we've forgotten. And it's time to remember them all. And when we do, when we speak their names even from outside the canon, we honor the full tapestry of divine history, not just the chosen, but the choosing, not just the heroes, but the builders, not just the known, but the essential. Their silence is no longer absence. It is an invitation to speak. The stories we explored today are more than ancient records. They're reflections of our deepest longings, to belong, to be forgiven, to build something meaningful even after we've fallen. Cain, Awan, Set, and Asura remind us that legacy is forged not in perfection, but in persistence. If this journey moved you, subscribe to the channel and choose to walk closer with the truth. Choose to follow Jesus. I'm Oliver, and it's my mission to help you see Scripture not just as history, but as a mirror to your own soul. Thank you for watching. May grace guide your steps, and may your story, like theirs, echo far beyond the silence.